Thanks for coming to the session, Higher Ed Selling. I don't know if anybody noticed that there is actually no D on the outer. It's like B, C, and F. I don't, it's like walking around, so I don't know if we missed anybody. So welcome. We have a great panel here today that has a lot of experience. Can we close the door there, please? Thanks. So, we've all, first of all, how many are vendors in the audience? And how many are institutions? A few. Okay, good. It's a good mix. So, it increasingly becomes a challenge in terms of making the connection between a vendor who's offering a significant amount of value, hopefully, to an institution, but it often is extremely difficult to be able to make the connection and really communicate the way that can be effective for both organizations. It's a really crowded, noisy, fragmented space in ed tech. There's not very good categories and taxonomies. There's a lot of vendors who sort of cross over, and it's difficult to communicate what the value proposition is. The brands tend to be a bit fuzzy. What's your brand versus somebody else's brand? Sometimes the value propositions are obscure, and it's difficult for an institution to understand what that particular organization is bringing. I had a lot of work that I did on the vendor side as a private sector person now in a university, and I always said to people in the sales VPs, don't confuse perception with reality, right? And so there's the perception at the buyer side. You're selling reality, but there's a perception that you have to obviously, conquer as a first step. And there's this, labyrinth of a lot of confusion between buyers, the value that the seller brings to the institution. Vendors get frustrated because they can't get access to a particular institution or people within an institution. It's a long sales cycle. This session is really designed to bring some practical wisdom into what's worked, what's not worked, what's important for vendors to pay attention to when it comes to communication. Most importantly, it's really not about a transaction and closing the deal. It's about building a relationship. So I think that's really important when we think about the approach on this. So I'm going to ask each panel member to give their name, their title, and what institution they're at, and then answer one question to start with is, what is a consistent miss? What's the miss that you can point to that, the vendor or the company got a foot in the door, were able to meet with you, you had a good productive session, but it was just a miss. So Lev, I'll start with you.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Lev Gonick. I'm ASU's Chief Information Officer, and after 10 years at ASU GSV, to the best of my knowledge, has for the first time actually not only got money and ideas in the room, but also buyers represented by my colleagues. I just want to thank them for being here, the CIOs who are here. And I would simply say, Lou, that the biggest miss consistently is actually understanding who is the customer, who is the influencer, and actually who has the check. And I think a lot of the frustration from the startups in particular, because I think we want to focus in on the startup experience, is not really knowing how to navigate the relationship between the decision maker, which represented, I think, consistently here, the influencers who are typically not us, and the people with the checkbook, which may or may not be us along the way. So we've all done work with well-established companies who always bring their sales teams and want to meet with us on how do you approach the CIOs. We almost never have that conversation with venture or private equity capital, and almost never have an opportunity to do it with startups. So we thought this would be a really interesting way to attend to this miss as to who really is the customer, and I'll come back a little bit later to tell you the kinds of things that we're looking for that are also consistent misses when you're talking to the CIOs, which is maybe different than a director or somebody like that.
Good afternoon, I'm Mark Henderson. I'm the CIO for the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. I would give a +1 to what Lev said, and I would also add a little nuance to that. And what I have found is that in many instances when we're being approached, most of the vendor community hasn't done their homework. So as Lev pointed out, I'm not the person really to spend your time and energy trying to get to. You need to get to the people who are relevant to the particular technology that you're trying to sell. And you need to do, I think, a fair amount of homework because you have a product, but that product may not work for the University of Illinois. So for example, it could work for Tracy at Duke, but we're 50,000 students. It may not scale, to meet the needs of Illinois. And I'll go further still. Even at 50,000, it may not scale for the 70+ thousand that ASU has. So, be very candid relative to your value proposition. Probably not spend a lot of your time and energy trying to get into my office, and do your homework. The other follow-up I'll say is understand the procurement rules in each of our states. They're rather odious in Illinois, but understand that because it's very difficult for this University of Illinois to do business with brand new companies because you haven't been vetted in the state, and our procurement rules are draconian.
I'm Tracy Futhey, Vice President and Chief Information Officer at Duke. Based on what I heard, skip over Mark in Illinois altogether. So both points are fantastic. The landscape at our institutions is complex. The knowledge of how you get into it and how you sell into it is important. The other one I would add, and the worst thing being last is the good ideas are taken, but the one I'd add is that I hear a consistent miss as being underestimating the complexity of making it happen. So it's not only who do you need to talk to, how do you make it happen, but just what does it mean when it happens, when you sell into our environment? What are the security expectations, FERPA requirements, right? How does that complexity play out? What about decentralization? What about the scale, right? Will your product really work in the turnkey way you imagine when it's scaled to 40,000, 60,000, 100,000? The decentralized nature also means that there is practically never an easy top-down answer to anything in higher ed, at least at research universities. A couple of my favorite presidential quotes from university presidents. One, I'm the only CEO of a $3 billion company that can't tell anyone what to do. And two, I feel like I spend my life walking through a graveyard because I've got hundreds of people, thousands of people under me, and not a single person listens to me. So this is from the president of esteemed research universities. We're just the lowly CIOs. So if you come in expecting you make the sale, it's a long game, not a short game, and we can't hardly ever institute or require anybody's solution, no matter how good it is, for our entire environment. So that complexity, that decentralization, that heterogeneity of our worlds is something you all have to be willing and ready to live with.
So I'm going to switch back and forth between my university hat and my vendor hat. So I'm going to put my vendor hat on now and say, what you all said is impossible to sell at the higher education market, right? And so that was my conclusion for what you all said. Good information. So as a salesperson, you got to be like a forensic scientist to really understand how the university is mapped, right? Common logic is I sell a technology product, I'm going to go to a CIO.
Yeah.
Who are, if you think about, like if you had an organizational chart that was in a university that a salesperson could look like, where do you start? What are the essential components that you have to include in the conversation initially at the start? Who are the key influencers, especially when you're trying to sell an ed tech product?
Right. So Lou, let me kick that off and share that one of the again, represented here is many decades of experience in the CIO role. And I'd share with you that I encourage always startups in particular to actually set aside their perfect knowledge of how their solution is going to solve my situation by coming in and actually asking me what problem I'm actually up against and what am I actually trying to solve for. That happens actually way too rarely. Enthusiastic, very focused, startups are regularly trying to get in to see a director because ASU has 40,000 online learners. So any point solution in the online learning environment, right? I've got an answer to whatever the question is that you're asking. It's the same thing. It really doesn't matter what questions you're asking. And obviously, oftentimes in those kinds of situations, at ASU in particular, and Lou knows this very well, being a colleague, we are inundated with point solutions coming at us. And a point I want to fundamentally make is point solutions have different customers than platform solutions have in terms of customers. And overwhelmingly at ASU GSV, most of you are into thinking that you want to sell a point solution. But you also have to be honest with yourself. How are you actually going to be exiting your point solution? By either selling to a bigger point solution provider or to a platform player. And all the buyers on our side of the house know that. So we're not going to, if a director comes to me and says, hey, Lev, and it happens all the time. I'll give you a quick example, Lou. Online verification. ASU, it really matters. We want to make sure that the student who's online is actually the student who's supposed to be online, taking the various assessment tools that are there. Well, who do you sell that into? The person responsible for online academic integrity. And our buddy has got 5 of these opportunities in front of them, and faculty pulling their hair out because none of them are quite ready for prime time at scale. And all of them are telling me that they're looking to sell to an LMS. So I always say back to our verification folks, we really have to be very mindful about who is actually the buyer here. If you think it's just a point solution, then we better be telling the provost of the university that in 2 to 3 years, this point solution will be out of business. Because hopefully they're going to be exiting to whatever they're running after, and that will put the university at some risk going forward. So my responsibility more times than not is actually to either ask tough questions, or as my friend Mark Henderson says, pull out the red flag and throw it on the field and sort of say, that sounds like BS. I think that's part of the responsibility of understanding, what is going on, and again, just to indicate that understanding point solution customers versus platform customers is a big part of what gets negotiated in a big, complicated university.
Cool. I think Lev summed it up. The only thing that I would probably add to his observation is that in terms of my role as CIO, there are point solutions, but I'm typically looking over the horizon, and so you have to have some kind of compelling story that takes into account the shifting demands of the institution, where higher ed is going, particularly research-oriented institutions like ours. And you have to have a very compelling story for what you are offering us that takes into account, a horizon of 36 to 60 months out. Because I get it, you're in to make the sale. I guess the other thing I would say is you should spend time really, and they'll really appreciate you. Because not a whole lot of vendors come calling on my systems analysts, okay, or my security analysts, or our people in our innovation area who are lower down in the organization. But those are the people who are very strong influencers. They're the ones who know when I'm thinking 36 months out and are planning for that. And if you can gain their trust and gain their buy-in, that goes a long way to these kinds of things floating up to my level for review and consideration.
I would add, I take the premise that it's not, well, I would counter, it's not impossible to sell to us. But what I will say is really, really easy, at least for me, is to partner with me toward improving a product, toward building something. So I might not be ready to sign the checkbook, but I'm sure ready to think about how we put some time into working with your solution, testing it, helping to scale it, and proving it out in a way that I can then credibly go to my peers and say, yeah, it worked really well for us. You know, when we started out, it was a little rocky, but we got there. We found ways to integrate with our authentication environment. We've got ways to, right, to conquer other problems and challenges that we often have with a product that's being sold into higher ed, but not built for higher ed.
And Tracy, I mean, I would just add in, Tracy's one of the best, in fact, I would say right at the very top of people in the community, vendor community, to pull those kinds of relationships early on. I'd only underscore that in addition to a sale, another consideration for those of you who are trying to get into the higher education market is to realize the value of the strategic.
That's right.
So it may not be a sale. It may just, the fact that Tracy Futhey actually engages, has her architects, engineers all working on that, that endorsement, which she may or may not agree to let you use her name or the university's name, more times than not, she's actually very generous in doing that. We try to do the same thing at ASU. That actually helps us all pre-qualify the opportunities, because I will say, and I have to Tracy and Mark on multiple occasions, hey, just want to let you know, we've been playing with a vendor in a particular space. Let's just use one of the spaces that we're really interested in is voice-enabled services on campus, associated with things like Echo and the like. Well, if we're working with third parties in that space, we always are checking in with each other. And I'll oftentimes say, you know what, I'm not yet a customer, but I'm actually a strategic partner in conversations. And Lou and I sit on an internal board at ASU for actually funding some of those early startup activities. But they almost always start with a strategic engagement with someone in our organization who says it's actually interesting, potential solution to a problem that we actually face.
If I could add one other thought in the context of this, you know, also be open-minded to, although you may start out coming to us to make a sale, you know, you may actually want to make a buy, because among the research community across our institutions, our researchers are in large measure doing things that probably are a lot like what you all are trying to create and to sell to us. And imagine the power of partnering with some of our researchers internally on some of these things, vis-a-vis perhaps even bringing funding, you know, to accelerate some of these products that they may already have in their bags and are doing it, you know, for research purposes. But we all are very interested in the commercialization of a lot of the research work that takes place in our communities.
So a lot of companies here are startup organizations, early stage. You may or may not have heard of them. They've done a good job at catching some initial interest. They get in the door. You have a meeting with them. Other than, I mean, you can talk about the product too as well, but what are the confidence drivers that you see in an organization that when they leave the room, you're compelled to invite them back? And that could be confidence around the product itself, but also the characteristics of the company.
Well, first of all, it's got to be a space that I'm interested in. So assuming we can check the box on that. The second is the leadership of the organization that either I know of, heard of. More times than not, I make judgments. Relatively few commitments on my part to invest in first-time entrepreneurs, but certainly if they come with good experience, I'm going to give that a check mark. And then it's actually the specific solution that they're actually presenting. Those three gateways, if you will, kind of the actual space that they're in, the solution they have, and the people who are running the organization. Those are the three things that I regularly, fairly quickly come up to speed with, and I almost make gut check. Like inside of 2 minutes, right. I pretty much have made a decision. And it probably doesn't come as much surprise, but if you are getting into the CIO because Lou says, hey, here's a friend who I trust who says, you know, it'd be worth me taking 15 or 20 minutes of the day to meet, you know, that gets me through one of the three checks right away.
Yeah.
I'd also add to the point that I made when I kicked off my remarks is that you've done your homework and that you understand our space and that you have a compelling argument for why we ought to use you on top of what Lev was just saying.
And for me, the only thing I would differ on Lev, I'm happy to work with first-time entrepreneurs. I actually relish it because I look at it as an opportunity to, kind of help you all have your good habits early on, rather than later on after you've had a couple companies and now you think it's easy to sew into higher ed. But the things I think about are the integrity of the leader, the founder, the principal, and I really want to know that. I don't want to be sold to. I want to be partnered with. So a willingness to partner, and I don't mean partner in such a traditional and rigid sense. I mean, partner just may mean, look, I'm going to be square with you when what you're giving me doesn't work, and don't give me any BS back, because you're just going to have to fix it. That it can be a transactional partnership, so to speak, but it's got to be on equal footing. And then the third is a willingness to listen goes along probably with that second. And if I feel like the person or the company knows it all, has it all figured out, and is just trying to sell to me, it's usually a harder conversation.
And if I could just clarify, at ASU, there are other people interested in first-time entrepreneurs. I go back to my earlier comment about understanding who to actually approach at the university. In fact, ASU deals with hundreds of first-time entrepreneurs all the time. What I've chosen to do is actually be very selective in the first-time entrepreneurs who I wouldn't refer to Bennett Wash or to colleagues over at Ed Plus and the like.
Incidentally, just for statistics purposes, for those vendors, 63% better chance of closing a deal if you get a second meeting. So let's keep that in mind. So I'll throw a little bit of a softball out that's not scripted in advance. Is my sense, and having played a role in both sides of the equation, both on the private sector side and the institutional side, is we have a widening chasm in the marketplace of the supply of products to the market and the demand side. It's either a miss, vendors not necessarily creating things that the industry wants. It may not be crafted in the way it should be crafted based on what the needs are. What is our collective interest in wanting to partner, in particular with early stage companies, to do a little bit of co-creation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this gets to Mark's point about working with our faculty and to protect downside risk, which is a huge thing that your money is interested in, right? They're interested in protecting downside risk, is to find a way to engage with the university. One might be with the researchers who can help you with their IP and coming to some IP sharing agreement. The other is to look at the co-creation as a way forward. I would be very candid to say that we're actually, generally speaking, not that good at it in higher education. I think we understand philosophically why co-creation is a really good way forward, but until the universities, and I'll only speak from my 30 years of experience until getting to ASU 16 months ago, most of that has been a kind of suspicion and a kind of distrust of the marketplace dynamic. And we covet the idea that our IP contribution and co-creation is somehow worth more than our potential partners along the way. My experience has been largely that if you just start with an equal partnership kind of framework, actually value can be created. And I've had a half a dozen good experiences approaching that work and arranging for licensing or royalty arrangements to let others sell into the marketplace along the way. So I would just say, Lou, on that one, I think we fancy co-creation. I think there's relatively little experience that we can put into a playbook that allows us to repeat and rinse, repeat and rinse.
Right.
Yeah. We have other parts, as Lev pointed out as well, we have other parts at the University of Illinois that specializes in bringing about these kinds of things. And actually, we relish the opportunity to spin off some of these opportunities into companies in the marketplace. So again, I would really be suggesting that you look at partnerships with some of these entities that have been spun out, or even beginning in a 50-50 kinds of arrangement with some of the work that our faculty members are doing. The other thing that I'll say, and I'm not trying to be a dark rain cloud, but it is really, really noisy in your space right now. I mean, I don't really understand in many instances how to differentiate between the offerings, across maybe 5 of you all who are talking about, mobile applications in the student space. or data analytics associated with this and that, or, so you have to figure out some kind of differentiator that raises you above the noise. And, to approach kind of a partnership arrangement would help go a long way in achieving that.
Only thing I'd add is that I think there are different levels of formality and structure to the idea of a partnership. Uppercase P, right? Lowercase p. And to me, if I find a company who I think has a great idea, great product, and the right capability, but just lacks the awareness of our marketplace, our environment, I'm right at the table to help them figure out how to get in there. And maybe I don't want to share, right? Maybe I just want to make sure that my institution will always have a perpetual right to use, no cost, and you can make your money off other people. That that to me could be a winning proposition. It doesn't all have to be about dollars transacted one way or another. It can be about different kinds of value and making sure those work for both parties.
And I just one quick piece to add is that ASU, I think, is very different than certainly my experience in other institutions of higher education, because one, we have a president who doesn't, for a moment, resist the notion of going right through the organization and saying, "Hey, Lev, you should be meeting with," and it's yes, sir, and here we go. So
I gotta say, I kept waiting for how you were going to finish that statement as you started. I'm thinking, is he digging himself deeper or out?
No, some institutions kind of there is a bit of formality. I was kind of building on your partnership framework. But at ASU, the president doesn't hesitate to engage, and I actually think part of what has made ASU such an amazing place is just the receptivity to all ideas that are relevant to the mission of the institution. And I think that there are other than creative ways to be thinking about co-creation. When a president or a provost or a chief investment officer sees the opportunity to create value together, that's a whole lot different than it coming from a startup saying, "Hey, why don't we try to work on something and create value together?"
Right.
And you probably are starting to get a theme here. How you interact with, Duke, which is private, and how you interact with the University of Illinois, which is highly public, is much different. And there are different rule sets that govern our interaction. So, for example, we can only engage with a company up to a certain dollar level. And if you choose to engage with us and you get to that dollar level and you've been kind of an insider, you may be precluded to bid on an RFP that then comes to the market. And it's those kinds of rules and regulations I would encourage you to fully understand in terms of how you shape your engagement.
So going back to sort of entrepreneurship, there's a significant amount of capital that never hits the education market. Regardless if you've got the best product in the world, it doesn't hit this market because investors are just very, very skittish about investing in long sales cycles, right? Now, it is a long tail type of environment and it's patient capital that's needed. What's your sense of if the procurement environment is changing? How might it change to be able to accommodate faster sales cycle to increase the flow of capital and confidence into this market? What is it we're doing creatively today to sort of get around that issue? We've got a private institution has its own constraints, two public institutions that have to report to a regent structure. What's your sense on the direction this is headed?
Maybe Tracy, you should.
I'll go with the easy one. Privates are pretty easy. We have our own constraints, as you point out, but they are of our own making, not through somebody else, not by some other entity, not by regents. I was going to joke when Mark talked about the RFP process. I mean, there is little that we buy in my organization through my operation that is an RFP. We can choose any vendor we want, anytime we want, any product we want, and that is diametrically opposed from the life.
How's that feeling, Mark?
Oh, how I miss the privates.
So a lot easier at a private. Again, other constraints, but the publics are answering to others.
The easiest way that I could suggest in terms of University of Illinois would be to somehow establish a partnership with a vendor that already has a contractual relationship with the institution. Then we have vehicles that we can use to acquire you without going through, jumping through hoops. And we aren't limited except for whatever that vehicle is at the upper echelon in terms of how much we spend.
But there's more and more understanding too among the privates about banding together and trying to get common contracts and common language. So all hope is not lost. Don't walk out of here as the most depressing thing ever.
Again, I think it's one of the differentiators at ASU is, though, while it's a public institution, it definitely does not operate as a state institution. And the procurement rules exist as a kind of framework, but I have seen enormous creativity, and I believe that's in part kind of what attracts investors to the ASU ecosystem, is that there are many different tentacles within the ASU environment. There is a traditional procurement, but there is also a whole knowledge partners part of the ecosystem, which is a different way of getting engaged with and actually co-investing, never mind co-creating in this space. And ASU also has a very robust online environment, which again has some procurement responsibilities. But when it comes to investment, I've seen an enormous amount of interest in the Ed Plus environment. So I do think that there are different shades of public institutions when it comes to procurement. I've been in this business a long time, and I would say that in the public environment, which I started in my career and I'm now in again, it is so much better, even in the public environment, notwithstanding the Illinois example, just because the idea of actually creating value is something that the disruptors in our marketplace, the Amazons, who are disrupting all manner of procurement these days that are out there, AWS, Google Cloud. I mean, the idea that we could actually procure a services orientation, like I can tell you 15 years ago, like we would have not been able to figure out how to make that work almost anywhere in public higher education. And today, we can do that, and we do that, and there is, I think, a very robust environment for investment, albeit that the sales cycles remain longer than any of us would like them to be.
Yeah, I think there's also, just as an sort of added thought here, is there's a lot of room for experimentation, and a lot of vendors will set up a sandbox and experiment with it. But at least my experience being on this side of the equation now, oftentimes a vendor will set up a sandbox and just leave. It'll just be done, or you have your thing and you go do it. But I really think, and that doesn't mean give away your product for free necessarily, but I think that there's a lot to be said for experimentation. On ASU Online, for instance, we're trying to consistently deconstruct the LMS and try point solutions to the benefit of point solutions to sort of integrate in and just try them and put them out there at scale. And in my experience sitting in Ed Plus, I would say at least a better than 50% success rate in small sort of game changer types of technologies, on a trial come in that have been, really, really well managed, well nurtured by the university and the vendor, and it's worked out quite well.
If I could just add one more piece, I mentioned sort of the AWSs of the world, and I think for those of you in the vendor startup community, we've established through John Rome's leadership a center for essentially cloud innovation with AWS. Your ability to plug into that platform provides both your investors, yourselves, your prospective future customers to be using a platform technology around which I think it is consistently easy to show the fellow travelers that you are actually working with in the ecosystem. And again, I think that's good for investors who can actually say, we're essentially certified to be working with Microsoft Azure or AWS or the like, and plug into those. It's in some ways it's very much a throwback to another time in higher education where we had core systems, and if your stuff worked with those systems, you were off to the races.
So lightning round here.
Okay.
Give us an example of a vendor relationship that's either failed and or succeeded that got it to close or not.
one that not a startup, but one that has worked very well with us has been with Splunk. And the reason is because they never really came in and talked to us about selling. They came in and talked to us about the art of the possible, and how they could really help us address some of our long-term strategies through the use of their analytics engine. And really the reason is we talked about things way beyond just buying the product, and things that will come to fruition, over the next 12 to 24 months. So a longer planning horizon and understanding our needs and coming in to be really a partner with us.
So for me, it would be a success and a failure, not by the same company, but in the same domain. We worked with a company that was an early mover in the area of video assets and materials and plugging them in and managing them on behalf of the LMS. And it was going really, really well until they got big enough, right, after the few startups, and they got big enough that all of a sudden the price is going through the roof, and we couldn't really afford to be a customer anymore in our estimation for what we wanted to pay for that. And there's a local company that did good purpose development work and said, what do you need? And we said, we need this. And within a year, they built exactly what we needed. It had an adoption rate faster than the previous product we were using, and they've continued to expand it, again, to this point of, what do you need? What is it you're trying to do? And let me help you get there. So that's been a great example.
So they made an effort to adapt
they
their baseline
came in and said,
product.
what's your, the very first
What's your
question,
pain? Yeah.
right? What's your problem?
Yeah.
What's your pain? And we said, here's what we need. They said, oh, we can do that. And at first it wasn't perfect, but eventually we stuck with them, they stuck with us,
Got it.
and it's grown into now a product that's sold a bunch of other places and starting to, threaten, right, the long-time incumbent in the space.
Just quickly, before there was ubiquitous Gmail for universities, ASU stepped up when there was this little, relatively small company called Google, and was the first mover. And that has persisted now for a better part of a decade, our relationship with Google. In the shared space, network space environment, we're working through a less than satisfactory relationship with another company that had no presence in higher education. That company is called Dropbox, because they did exactly what Tracy outlined. They came in, they wanted to work with ASU, they gave us preferred pricing, and it's been really hard for us to figure out how to renew because they've come in with a bill that's a significant shock to the system. On the startup side, a little shout out for collaboration tools. Yellow Dig is a small, relatively small player. They did the right thing as coming in, listening, working with some of the online faculty and folks working in instructional design. And this last year, I signed off on an enterprise deal for them. Again, maybe it's going to work to them like it'll be like Google, maybe not.
Yeah.
And my shout out to name names for the little company that we worked with and now is getting bigger and more customers called WarpWire. Great tool.
So we got about a little less than 2 minutes left. Everybody's seen the Edge of Ventures map of all of the name brands and all the logos on the page. It's very fragmented. Oftentimes, I would say about 30% of that is logos duplicated in other areas of the taxonomy. What's missing? What are we missing as a vendor community that the market needs that is a big gaping hole?
There are any number of huge areas that ASU has appetite for. I mentioned a much more robust voice-enabled ecosystem for a voice-enabled campus being one of them, hugely important. And then I would say the second piece that I think is enormously important is sorting through how to deal with sort of digital, particularly video asset management at scale. We need a solution yesterday.
I'll give a +1 to his second one. The first one is a consumer issue as far as I'm concerned. It'll get there. The second one is a higher ed specific issue. We are hugely lacking in the ability to have flexible, easy to manage video resources, reuse, mix and match across courses, across everything else. Huge opportunity.
I'll give a +1 to that as well. And video, you know, transcending just the academic requirements, but security. I mean, we're moving more and more to high definition security cameras for public safety and the ability to manage that in an effective way. We need solutions in that space.
Awesome. We got to wrap it up. Thank you very much for coming today, and please give our panelists a hand.
Thanks, guys. Very much appreciated. Very much appreciated.